Welcome to the Special Education Inner Circle podcast. I'm your host, Katherine Witcher. If you sit at an IEP table, you belong here. For over 25 years, I've been helping parents, teachers, admins, and therapists build IEPs that work in the real world, and I can't wait to help you. Let's dive in. I'm very excited to have Maria Gilmour, author of the Seven Superpowers, here to talk about compassionate support at home and school. This is such an important topic for us to dig into. And Maria, you are just a light in this kind of world that feels heavy and stressful when it comes to supporting students who are challenging. And I cannot wait to just share the strategies and have the conversation that so many of us need. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So let's just go ahead and talk a little bit about what do you mean by, supporting a child with compassion when it comes to behaviors or just as a whole child at school or at home?
Well, so I grew up in a very strict household. However, my mother and father were very compassionate people. And it was hard for me to kind of make sense of that because it's now what I see parenting is like you're either reactive and you're putting fear in your kids, or you're going to be super loving and peaceful, but that can be a little too soft. So you can show this compassion, but the way you're showing compassion is by implementing the right kind of support, a loving support.
Yeah. So compassion to me, it kind of shares that balance of, I'm going to make sure that we get done whatever needs to get done, whatever we're working on, whatever we're going through at that moment. It doesn't mean that we're giving in all the time, but it also doesn't mean that everything's black and white and rigid, which is what we hear a lot when we're talking about, supporting a child in their development, especially a child who is struggling with their behaviors or struggling to get through tasks that maybe are not their favorite, or they're new tasks to them. So it might feel scary and they're having a lot of emotions. There's a lot of different strategies that are out there. And I think it can be confusing for parents and teachers to kind of find the best thing that works. So could you give us some strategies? And and as you're giving these strategies, just kind of share with us where, what's your role? I know you have a lot of experience with IEPs. You have a lot of just experience in this field. So just kind of wrap around some strategies of how do we find what's going to work for a child, and how do you know that?
Gosh, I have been in the field for 25 years. I started working with children with autism in the late 90s. And I actually got started when I was a swim instructor at the pool. And the kids would hear, "No running, no running." And the kids would run faster. And I would have these kids in my class. And I said, let's tell them walk your feet. Tell them what to do. So instead of yelling at them, you're going to be telling them what to do. And that's just, that's definitely compassionate to kind of meet them where they're at. Strategies that I think, one of the biggest strategies that I use every day is the neutral face. This is having that level of patience where you can just really kind of take your emotions out of a reaction. And your child's watching you all the time. They're absorbing everything. And so knowing that recording light is always on with your child and having that neutral face is really key when you don't want to react to a behavior, or you don't want to lead them to make a choice that you want for them, that they can have their own choice.
Yeah. So we talk about choices all the time when it comes to behaviors, following through with, different tasks and just kind of getting things done. We're like, give a child choices. We have a lot of influence on those choices, and realizing our influence. We were kind of chatting before we hit record. I said, I have older children, and as my children are older and becoming, real adults that have real opinions and real thoughts. And, it's different as children start to grow. I feel like the neutral face has become even more important as a child gets older, because I want them to make choices for themselves based on what they want and who they are. And I'm glad that they're talking to me about it, but I don't necessarily always want to influence that choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me about this. We use the word downshift, right? Of just, okay, things happen throughout the day, whether it's we have to hurry up and get ready for school in the morning. At school, we have to hurry up and transition to the next thing. We're doing all this like hurry up and go. And our energy gets high and things don't always go right. And we need to downshift. Do you have some strategies to help our teachers and parents who need to make this shift and say, okay, I can't react in this moment?
Well, I think the whole idea is having that awareness of, of what you look like, and what your it can also be over text message or emails too. If you're communicating with people, this doesn't just, this is not just with children. This is with all ages and all relationships. But to really recognize when you have strong emotions, because I think that's where kids really start to watch. I would watch my father. He would come home from a hard day at work and he wouldn't smile. And I would be like, why aren't you smiling? What is going on? I said, oh gosh, she's watching me. Oh, I'm fine. It's a hard day at work. But, and so I think that my parents really they had all of these strategies, these superpowers down, but they weren't trained clinicians. And then they all kind of turned into evidence-based practice. Well, a lot of what they used, this is all evidence-based practice, but I'm kind of painting a picture through the stories in the book. And I think that, they didn't know that, Maria's going to remember everything that I do or say in the moment, but then they learn that over time. And so I think that just always making sure that you are keeping your emotions in check or being able to remove yourself from a situation too. With teenagers, I work with teenagers in my practice, and I also have teenagers in my home. And they are completely different than they were a year ago. And so it was hard for me. Here I am, a professional all these years, and I'm struggling the most making that shift. And it's until I said to myself, wait, they're different. They're kind of like mini adults. I can't parent them. Like I can't do it in that way. And so that was a big thing for me. It's like, okay, my emotions are strong and they can see when I don't like what they say, or they can see when I'm going to give them a directive and they can't hang out with their friends. And so I think that being aware of our behavior and emotions around our children, around people in general, is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I see kind of all the time out on social media where we're talking about like you can't de-escalate a situation if you're escalated yourself. And
Mhm.
so many times we try that as adults. We think like, come on, like if we could just get the situation under control, we'll all be okay. But our
Mhm.
first step is to really realize what do we need to do for ourselves in this situation? That's our oxygen mask first, right? Like we've got to do that first before we can de-escalate a situation. I think a lot of times when we're talking about supporting a child in multiple environments and, the child has deficits in several different areas, they're constantly kind of under the microscope themselves, right? Of like, are we making progress? Are we meeting the next milestone? Where are we at with all of these things? Everything feels very intense. And then we get to, FBAs, right? Our functional behavior assessments. We get to BIPs and we're looking at our behavior intervention plans and everything feels intensive and harsh. A lot of times it just feels harsh and it feels like all or nothing in that. So can you just speak to maybe some things that would help coach? I know that you're fantastic at kind of leading. That's what I love about Seven Superpowers book is that it's very much from like a coaching aspect. It's a storytelling coaching of like, come on, we got this. Like there's some superpowers in here and we can kind of coach through. How do you make that shift from feeling like everything has to be intensive and harsh to compassionate and just shifting that direction?
Mhm. So I work with severe behaviors, or, aggression, self-injury, property destruction. I get this question often, and it's so complex. It really is. There's, data collection all the time. It feels harsh. It does feel harsh sometimes or rigid. You have to do this, 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 this. You also have to be compassionate at the same time. So I think that looking at that situation, this is very complex, or this is actually, we can take a step back and go back to basics and make it as simple as possible. When we get caught up in the details, that's an indicator to take a step back and go back to basics.
Oh,
Um,
that's fantastic. I love that. I want everybody to like write that down, like back to basics. Like we can start by stopping is basically, we can start making change by like stopping doing some things. That's one of my favorite strategies in IEPs. And so everybody's like, what else should we add in? I'm like, what else can we take out? How can we stop doing some things and kind of refocus? So I love that so much.
mhm, right. Yeah.
So if we stop doing some of the things and then we have to restart, can you just share some of maybe the tools that you would suggest for this more kind of, maybe we're shifting from something that's very rigid and very kind of compliance driven of like, this is how it's going to be. And it's all or nothing. And now we want to support and have a compassionate environment at school and home to help a child really enjoy their environment, start to enjoy learning, start to enjoy relationships. And that, what are some of the tools, like actual physical things that you love to kind of, just integrate into this?
So I talk about the fun zone in the book, and that is a no blame zone. Everybody who is in that time period, you're saying you walk into a room and you're with your child. There's nobody to blame. You can do anything you want. You're not giving them any directives, and so it's building that relationship that we call that non-contingent reinforcement. And that's a real. I would say that's probably the number one thing when we're going from a complex situation, real heavy, to something where we want to go back to basics. Get in that fun zone right away. Start dancing with your kid or do something, fun zone if you're following your child's lead, and also that your child doesn't feel like they always have to be performing for you.
Yeah. And that, I love that. Get into the fun zone. So I want to encourage everybody to, find the links wherever you're watching, wherever you're listening to this. I'm going to put the links there for Seven Superpowers. And I would love for you to go take a look at it. And we can always use more information and different perspectives on how to support a child in multiple environments. And again, the kind of this coaching perspective of the Seven Superpowers and what we can do together as a team is so very important. So Maria, again, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Catherine.
Wait, one quick thing before you go. If you enjoyed this episode of the Special Education Inner Circle podcast, could you please leave a review, share it with a friend, or maybe even take a screenshot and tag me on Instagram? Every time you leave a review or share, it helps more parents and teachers find resources they need to help them at their IEP table.